When politics of change, real change, happens in the streets.
There's no reason that we don't talk about socialism as the only answer.
And the ones at every single protest say, "Hell yeah!"
Show me what democracy looks like.
We are the Party for Socialism and Liberation.
Welcome back, everyone. This is going to be our next Meet the PSL. If you don't remember, if this is your first time, I'm Mustafa, and this is...
And I'm Zach.
Today we're going to be talking about how 2020 shaped your politics. We're going to have three speakers, Kat, Rusty, and Vivek, talk about how 2020 radicalized them or further put them down their path politically. As we'll see with a lot of our comrades talking about the things that they learned and the things that changed them in last year, which hopefully last year changed everyone in some way.
And I'm sure it did. Last year was a year that was hard on all of us. And it's something that we as a country and as, we as like just the world experienced all together. Just, a global pandemic, global uprisings, and just many, many other things. So there's a lot to talk about, and it's like a monster of a prompt for all of us to have in order to really give a concise, few minute answer. So I'm really looking forward to what everyone has to say.
Yeah, and for anyone who's been on Twitter or TikTok or anything, right, everyone's been saying, and it is so true, if 2020 didn't radicalize you, you need to start doing some soul searching.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you all know, it is April, and this video is coming out at the tail end of April, but it is Eco Month. And being in Houston, we've experienced a lot of climate crisis in the past year. And so one of the things is that we have a video up on our YouTube channel. It's an ERCOT educational panel that we filmed before this video. And the link will be in the description. It covers a variety of topics from the Houston history of climate change, prisoners during times of climate crisis, and the unhoused during climate crisis. We really like education in the PSL, and I know specifically for me and Mustafa, education is a core value of ours, so I really encourage everyone to watch it, drop any questions you have, comment if you want to see more videos like that. Education is very important, and it's also fun to be done in an easily digest way.
Yep.
Also, in the lines of Eco Month, we have one of our books that's a PSL publication. It is on pslweb.org, and you can click publications and you can find this book. The name of this book is Climate Solutions Beyond Capitalism by Tina Landis. Check it out. It's a great book. I've read it before, and honestly, climate change isn't going away, and it's something that we should all definitely educate ourselves on, and the root cause of climate change, which is capitalism.
And the cool thing about this book is it gives a much more Marxist perspective on the situation, because a lot of people who have written books on the topic kind of take this sort of individualist perspective where it's just like, oh, all of you people, like the consumers, need to reduce your use or reduce, reuse, and recycle.
Or go vegan.
Or go vegan, right, says the vegan. But this one actually comes at a perspective that's a little more balanced and a little more grounded in the actual material conditions that produce climate change. So it's not just talking about what we need to do better, but also what the source of these issues are. Okay, so now we're going to introduce our first speaker. It's going to be our comrade Kat. She's going to be talking about 2020, her experience, and how it shaped her politics.
Hi, my name is Kat, and I'm with the Party of Socialism and Liberation, here to tell you how 2020 has shaped my politics. So 2020 has been a year where the problems in an unsustainable system were on steroids. The contradictions, frustrations, and failures of our government and system is nothing new, it's just simply highlighted. I really like to use the word unsustainable because it's perfect to describe an economic and social system that has no regards for the lives of people, because profit is the only thing that matters. Honestly, how do we expect communities, individuals, to prosper in an inhumane system that sees humans as objects that can be used until there's nothing but a shell and then simply throw away. I have no tolerance for this system. The United States and South Korea both received their first case of coronavirus on the same day, yet South Korea only has 100,000 cases with only 34 deaths per 1 million population, and the United States, being the leader of coronavirus cases with almost 31 million cases to be exact, has 1,701 deaths per 1 million population. More than 500,000 lives in the United States have been disposed of for a prosperous economy. But people still live in horrible conditions, stress whether there will be a next paycheck or whether they will have a place to live. And it's honestly heartbreaking to see the number of people who had to die for absolutely no reason. The government officials who supposedly have a role in serving the people don't even seem to flinch at this number. And they do nothing to prevent more deaths or more cases from happening. And some even mock COVID safety measures. So why are such inhumane individuals in the government? And they obviously don't care if people die or if people struggle financially or just struggle to survive simply. China is critiqued for their strict, oppressive methods to contain the virus, but they prevented way more losses. They cared about the lives of the people. They even built a hospital for incoming coronavirus cases within a week. And in Texas, we struggled to simply implement and enforce a mask mandate. Even if one doesn't want to acknowledge the success that China has had in controlling this pandemic, you can simply look to other countries such as New Zealand and Australia who have handled this pandemic wonderfully. And that's because they put the lives of the people first. But I guess that in the United States, it's too radical to think that people's lives matter. There's such an immense outrage at the sight of the Black Lives Matters movement, a movement that just strives for the basic human rights of the Black nation not to be brutalized, killed, and targeted by police, and thus the movement itself defends the human rights of all minorities not to be brutalized by the police. How do we expect our lives to matter when Black ones do not in this system? At the cry for an end of violence, the movement is met with violence by the police. At the cry to an end of violence, the movement is deemed a threat. The argument for Blue Lives Matter or All Lives Matter, it's not about caring for life. It's simply racist individuals who are outraged at the sight that there is a desire for Black lives to matter. My ex-principal from high school that is predominantly Black and Hispanic had a Blue Lives Matter post on her Facebook page from 2016, and she was hired as our principal in 2017. My school and the students in it, we were just simply something to put on her resume, a stepping stone so she could be promoted. We didn't matter. How do I know so? Well, she decided to integrate our high school into a Lone Star College campus due to the program my school offers for associate's degrees. So principal helps predominantly minority high school move to a college campus. That sounds amazing, does it not? It was done at a rush. So we had no cafeteria. And for my senior year on free and reduced lunch, I ate ham, cheese, and crackers, and ate maybe a protein box on a special occasion because that's all they had for us. My ex-principal obviously didn't care. Now being an executive in my district, and you could honestly tell because there was no effort, no rush, no initiative for a cafeteria to be built, for students to have a warm and decent meal. We were just a line on her resume, objects to be thrown away when no longer deemed useful. I mean, honestly, why would she care about Black and Hispanic students, especially being against Black Lives Matter? Why would our lives and well-being matter to her? Nor does our district care. Such a menacing lack of humanity that not even children's well-being matters. Just as long as the district looks clean and amazing on paper. The individual who is my role model and source of inspiration had their senior college project dedicated to Una América Humana, or a humane America. And the thought of a humane America where there's an investment in people's and communities' lives often brings tears to my eyes, because it seems like it's such a dream when we live in such an inhumane system. 2020 has been the year where it has been shown that although we are human, there is an immense lack of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kat, and I really appreciate, you taking time out of your schedule, especially since because of COVID and social distancing, you recorded at home. And I just want to thank you so much for participating in this video. One of the things that strikes me most about Kat's speech is how she talks about kind of the veil being lifted, and as we were saying in the beginning, that the veil was lifted for all of us, not just in Houston, not just in Texas, but around the world. As much as I'd like to believe Texas is my world, but that's just one of the things, is that it was it is, because 2021 is just 2020.1. It's just a continuation. And so to see somebody radicalize and deepen in their politics is something that is very, very, it sparks optimism, because there is two ways to go. You can be a doomer, or you can have optimism.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I wanted to say, is actually for me, the silver lining in this entire thing has been the fact that we've been experiencing this pandemic on a global scale, because not only do we have the solidarity with one another, although our experiences of it are still different to some extent for those in the third world and so on, but on top of that, it's something that the whole world is waking up at the same time too. And for me, that fuels my revolutionary optimism, and that everyone is seeing this at the same time, so that everyone can wake up and see, oh no, I wonder why this was so bad. Because if you look at examples where everyone, it was first reported in Wuhan, China, and yet they dealt with it probably the most effectively of anyone in the entire world. And then we saw how it was dealt with in Europe and all the EU states and the United States, and it's really our fault why COVID is going to be around any longer than it could have been.
Yeah.
And everyone else saw that too. So we know now, a lot more people know now exactly why it's here and why it lasted so long, and what we need to do to get rid of it.
Mm-hmm. So like Kat was saying with the unveiling, we're going to go ahead and go to our next speaker, which is Rusty. And Rusty had a really huge unveiling for himself. He had a very radical time in 2020, I got to see it firsthand. And so, his speech is something that for me is very powerful because I do know kind of where he came from, and I got to see his radicalization. So in 2020 is what shaped it. And so this prompt was perfect for him, but I'll let him speak for himself. So let's go ahead and introduce Comrade Rusty.
Hi, my name is Rusty, and I'm with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. For me, 2020 was a transformative year. I went into 2020 an anarchist and came out of it a socialist. At the beginning of the year, I knew that I wanted to get involved with a left-wing organization, and I was looking at all the different groups in Houston. I wasn't in a hurry. I took my time. Then, after May 25th, when George Floyd was murdered by the police, this country and this city exploded. I felt like I couldn't wait any longer, and I had to get involved. As an anarchist, I approached a lot of things from an individualist point of view. There was an emphasis on personal responsibility, personal growth, developing politically as an individual, and rebelling against anyone, anything that went against my principles. As 2020 went on, I felt more and more that something else was needed. I felt like for me personally, and on a larger scale as a society, something more collective was required to achieve the radical social change that we really need in this country. That's when I found the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and for the first time really dove into the philosophy and practice of socialism. It was through this lens of a newfound socialist party that I experienced the series of extreme events that was 2020. A year before, in 2019, I don't think that anyone could have predicted the state that we would find ourselves in. This country is no stranger to major political events, but last year felt like we were stepping into new territory. Never before have I felt like I was in the midst of an uprising. And that's really what it felt like, an uprising. I don't think that I could call it anything else. Things that come close in the past, with the 2008 financial crisis, Occupy Wall Street in 2011, the emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement in 2014, but those moments didn't become the persistent national uprising that we saw in 2020. I think that the desperation that people were feeling with the pandemic, combined with the outrage over the murder of George Floyd, was the perfect storm. The 2020 that we saw would not have happened without those two things. 2020 put a spotlight on a lot of the things that are wrong with the United States. The inequalities and contradictions of our society were so nakedly and painfully obvious that I don't think there was a single person that was left unchanged by that year. The pandemic was exposing the weaknesses in our healthcare system. The protests and riots over the summer showed the whole world the reality of the systemic racism inherent in the police. As the year went on, it seemed like we were living through history. There wasn't a month or a week that went by that didn't contain some monumental political event. There were also events and uprisings happening all over the world that year. There's the historic protest movement in India and other movements in Brazil, Nigeria, and countries all over the world. I saved a bunch of pictures of some of the things that were happening over the year, including protests in DC, torched cop cars in LA, people storming the Capitol on January 6th, California and Oregon on fire, protesters being tear gassed and journalists being arrested. The entire year I felt like we were days or a week away from everything changing forever. And that energy carried through the year, past the protests over the summer, and crashed against every new injustice. When Jonathan Price was murdered by the police in October of 2020, I was furious. I'm not really sure what it was about his murder that made me so mad. Black men being murdered in this country is not a new thing. Maybe it was because it happened in Texas. Maybe it was because Jonathan was friendly to the police, and still he was murdered. Whatever the cause, I felt a burning anger inside me at the injustice of his death. I felt I had to do something. I was glad when the Houston PSL put on a protest outside of the Houston Police Department headquarters downtown. When I was there yelling and shouting protest chants at the police, I felt all of that anger and frustration at the horrible injustice committed by the police. the racist criminal justice system, and the entire state apparatus that profits off of the suffering of black and brown people. That system that is rooted in white supremacy and upholds the interests of the ruling class. As I stood there in front of the HBD building with all the other protesters and our voices were echoing off of the glass and concrete, I could feel the power of a united and mobilized group of people standing up to the police, standing up to the ruling class, and standing up in support of all of the people that they brutalize and exploit. I think a lot about how extreme things were in 2020, and still are really. I often wonder what I would be doing if I wasn't part of a socialist organization. Would I have gotten more involved in liberal politics? Would I have stepped away from being politically engaged at all and just focused on my own well-being? I'm honestly really thankful that I joined the PSL when I did. I had an outlet for this kind of revolutionary energy I was feeling in everything that was going on last year, and that continues on even now. I have an organization and a group of people that I can channel that energy into in a way that can really have an impact. I feel that I'm doing the work that needs to be done to help achieve the radical social change that we really need.
Yeah, thank you so much, Comrade Rusty. That was a great speech, and I just felt like, something we're going to see a lot in common between all of these speeches, at least within these first two, is the fact that you just learn so much more about the things that were always there, somewhat subtle, but are so much more apparent after the pandemic and after the so transparent police violence that we saw in 2020.
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously, this story is pretty personal to me just because, we were friends before he joined the party. And so one of the things is that idea of individualism and then having a collective approach was actually what I saw personally kind of shatter individuality, or individualism, not individuality. We're individuals, but we're collectivists. Yeah. And so one of the things was seeing that shatter of individualism in Rusty was something that I have been seeing all over. Specifically, during I say during the pandemic as if it's not still happening, but
the peak of it.
The peak of the pandemic.
Yeah.
I am a healthcare worker, and so one of the things is that individualism had no place in healthcare. It never did. But the thing is that as the pandemic furthered and furthered, and the crisis just kind of blew up into something that was unmanageable, not just for our country, for Abbott, but also for the people in my work. And one of those things is that we started to realize that people were burning out really quickly, and we had to start leaning on each other, and that was something that was a tool that was useful for me, but also useful to get the things that we needed as healthcare workers. Definitely once we started binding together, I was able, I'm an organizer, online, I'm an organizer in person, I'm also an organizer at work. It's one of the things that doesn't really turn off in me. And so one of those things was to, get us specific things that we needed in order to be successful during the pandemic. I couldn't, force, us to force the whole state of Texas to wear masks, but there were things that we could get, as workers to kind of aid in our mental health and aid in the way that the hospital worked, just to make it easier on us and easier for us to give good quality care to the patients. And so that's what, collectivism is. And, the whole idea about, Rusty's individualism being shattered was something that I've seen all over. And I think that's a common experience that a lot of people are having, which is really good because at the end of the day, we all have to work together.
Yeah. No, I mean, the short note summarized that, and it can just never be overstated. It can never be overdone. We are not free until we are all free. And, that is something that you can and should say until it beats you dead over the head, because it'll never not be true.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like me and you specifically like exhaust that in
Yeah.
a way that's good.
It can't be overstated. It cannot be overstated. All right. So our next speaker, or not speaker, it's going to be Cole, who's going to give us an update on the situation in Denver. We actually have a lot of good news for you, so stay tuned.
Hi, this is Cole again with an update on the Denver case. So, as we discussed in our last video, several organizers with the Denver branch for PSL were arrested for protesting the murder of Elijah McClain. Their trial has now begun, and after the first of their pre-trial hearings, the judge found no evidence against them for kidnapping charges. The kidnapping charges were dropped, which is a major victory for our Denver organizers. However, this is just the beginning and there is a lot of work to be done. If you'd like to find out more and how you can help, you can go to the link below, visit denverdefense.org to find more information on the work that they've been doing against the murder of Elijah McClain, their trial updates, and how you can help. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cole. So yeah, it was really exciting finally getting the update that the kidnapping charges, which were the largest, most risky charges for our comrades, were dropped. However, unfortunately, the fight's not over. If you would like, we would ask you kindly to go and continue to support our comrades. If you can go to the
denverdefense.org.
denverdefense.org and pitch your support by either sharing the link on Facebook, Twitter, whatever social media, or even donating some money to be able to get more traction for that event. Thank you so much. So, our next and final speaker, last but never least, as I think you'll find as well, is going to be our comrade Vivek. Vivek was someone who, in 2020 and even before that, struggled a lot with his own political ideology and where he leaned on that spectrum. But last year really gave him, almost forced him to muster up the courage to dedicate himself to overcoming the challenge of one that, for a lot of us at first, is really anxiety-inducing. Being and claiming yourself as a Marxist. In name, and finally, joining the fight for liberation. So we're going to hear from Vivek now.
Hi, I'm Vivek. I'm with the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and I'm going to talk about how 2020 shaped my politics. 2020 was the year that I committed to leaving the comfort of reformism behind. 2020 was the year that I decided public perception of my politics would no longer hold me back. 2020 was the year that I made a commitment to the oppressed peoples of the world to devote my time and energy to the overthrow of capitalism. And 2020 was the year that I became a Marxist-Leninist. From 2011 to around 2015, I self-identified as politically engaged. After spending 4 years at a majority-white, majority-conservative university, I proudly sported liberal as my political designation on Facebook. I spent my time arguing with conservatives on the internet and reading political commentary from what I perceived to be objective sources at the time. During those years, I believed firmly in the Democratic Party of this country, and at the time I had but a surface-level understanding of our country's political landscape. I believe Democrats supported women's rights, while Republicans were committed to preserving the patriarchy. I believe Democrats were inclusive, while Republicans continued to allow racism to plague their party. And I believe that Democrats respected the separation of church and state, while the Republican Party was inextricably linked with Christianity. Around 2015, my faith in the Democratic Party platform started to dwindle. New experiences began shaping my politics in a different way. At the time, I was working at a company called Airbnb, a company that I believed to be progressive and distinct from the rest of the technology sector. However, my rosy outlook, or what I now recognize as willful ignorance, was disrupted by many activist groups that were protesting the company. These groups demanded that Airbnb answer for its outsized contribution to gentrification in San Francisco, but globally. They demanded that we answer for profiting off of listings in occupied Palestinian territory. And these critiques were met with such disdain from company leadership, but also from the people who I was coworkers with, people who identified as liberal Democrats. And this was quite troubling to me. It made me ask, what interests were we trying to preserve by characterizing all critical feedback as bad faith attacks? Did we not want to reckon with how our actions were directly affecting the material conditions of other people in our city? I admittedly didn't fully understand gentrification or the Palestinian occupation, so I started to read. And the more I learned about those subjects and others, the clearer it became to me that Democrats and Republicans alike were complicit in and had a vested interest in the perpetuation of oppressive systems. The Democratic Party, through their ability to co-opt progressive language, was able to convince the public that they were not the oppressors, but I was starting to learn different. The next few years mark my perpetually embarrassing leftist phase. I knew traditional establishment politics was a net negative for our country, but for whatever reason, I still had faith in the few progressives who made it into office, the Bernie Sanders, AOCs, Ilhan Omar, and etc. I knew capitalism was responsible for endless suffering and socialism was the path forward, but I wasn't yet able to articulate what exactly that meant. Fast forward a few years and 2020 hit us like a ton of bricks. The pandemic and the brutal murder of George Floyd propelled my political journey even further left. Each of these events shaped my understanding of the world in really significant ways. The pandemic made it abundantly clear that our country's loyalty is not to its citizens, but to capital. Each day, Americans died completely preventable deaths at the hands of extreme negligence by our state. Misinformation spread like wildfire. Politicians spent their time and energy passing blame instead of making meaningful change. Democrats and Republicans alike put the interests of businesses ahead of people by supporting reopening efforts before we were ready. The utter chaos of our healthcare system started to become even more clear. And it made me wonder, why are so many Americans dying while countries we deem authoritarian were able to handle the virus with swift and effective measures? And then a couple of months into the pandemic, the brutal, racist murder of George Floyd pointed out once again that police are not meant to protect the people, but rather exist to carry out state-sanctioned violence against anyone who questions their power. What about this was democratic, I wondered. I was enraged, and I knew that I needed to channel this anger into something meaningful. I decided to start by focusing on two tasks that were recommended by a number of activists and organizations that I'd started following. First was to read theory, and second was to join an organization. Like many of us, being stuck at home gave me some needed space to focus on learning. I began by engaging primarily with abolitionist literature. I discovered the work of Angela Davis, Ruth Wilson Gilmore, and others, and their writings were really profound to me. Their commitment to the working class, both domestic and global, as well as their commitment to liberating Black and other racialized peoples, all of that was really inspiring to me. And I'd noticed their work referenced Marxism, and while I'd come to learn a little bit about this tendency over the past few years, I'd never invested much time into it. And now was as good a time as any. So I began by diving into the works of Marx and Lenin. I was immediately struck by how relevant their analysis was today, despite being written over a century ago. Their conception of class struggle between the haves and the have-nots, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, aligned with how I was seeing the world. The liberal opportunists that Lenin warned against had perfect parallels in today's world. Lenin's writing on imperialism helped frame some of the earlier learning I'd been doing regarding the global South. The concepts of scientific socialism and historical and dialectical materialism appealed to my sense of reason. But this was also a challenge. It involved challenging and interrogating the many myths and mischaracterizations I'd been taught since birth. Over the many next months, I began to understand that Marxism was not just a political tendency, but rather a set of tools, a lens through which to view the entire world and all of world history. I also discovered that nothing is as impactful as going straight to the source material as opposed to relying on what others think. The works of Marx and Lenin eventually led me to Engels, Fanon, Parenti, Huey Newton and the Panthers, Assata Shakur, George Jackson, Mao, and so many more. I was just scratching the surface of a rich, radical tradition that helped make sense of not only the economic tragedy we've been facing, but the ecological tragedy we've been facing for hundreds of years. I could finally see that endlessly tweaking the knobs of capitalism and relying on the crumbs allotted to us via reformism is not the path to liberation. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris appointing women of color to head departments whose express purpose is to enact violence on its own citizens and those in the third world is not the path to liberation. Continuing to invest in the same systems that brought us the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and of course the deaths of 500,000 people here in the US during the pandemic is not the path to liberation. I joined the PSL after brief forays into other large national organizations because of the PSL's unrelenting commitment to freeing the oppressed peoples of this world, And again, not by tweaking those knobs of capitalism with the hopes that it suddenly acts differently than it ever has, but instead by fighting for socialism. Socialism is the path to liberation, and communism is liberation.
Thank you so much, Vivek.
Wow.
I'm kind of confounded. That was I think we should just end the video there.
But we can't.
No, we can't. No. He had me with just that first paragraph. Aside from just, I'm an English major, so that kind of writing just kind of stops my heart. Almost the last sentence of every paragraph was a mic drop, I think.
Yeah,
almost
definitely.
every one. But I don't know. What inspires me the most is there's just so much overlap between his experience of finally coming to Marxism-Leninism, with mine, especially as a South Asian and me being a West Asian myself. Just sharing that struggle of not finding community within our own cultural community within these kinds of struggles, and then also having to deal with that same struggle within a predominantly white community, both in college or at work. But finally, coming down to the point where you just got to say, screw it, I know this is what I have to do, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get there, which is, for all of us, liberation, right? It doesn't matter that, my brother, my mom are also Marxist-Leninists, or they may not even understand that struggle, but it's going to be my responsibility to continue that struggle myself, and if anything, try to get them there as well as everyone else myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And just another thing that I think is resonating with a lot of people is the disappointment in the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
And I think that's honestly being carried over into 2021. So I know this video is about 2020, but I feel like the disappointment, with Biden in 2020 saying things won't fundamentally change, which I think was a huge hammer on people's confidence in the Democratic Party. And I think a lot of people, now with, the 2K that we were supposed to get, but you already got 600, here's 1,400, still doesn't cover rent, still doesn't cover back rent, the constant threat of the moratorium being lifted. I think a lot of people, like Vivek, lost, hope, and well, not hope, but they lost confidence in the Democratic Party. And I think that is an overwhelming idea that we're all experiencing. And I think 2021 is what put the crack in their armor against, being the good ones against the Republicans. Because at the end of the day, there is no, Democrat versus Republican. They're on the same side, and they're against us. We're on the side for liberation. They're on the side of the ones that bring us in chains. Yeah.
And to touch on another related note, let's be honest for a second, and I'm speaking from my own experience too. A lot of us who are here, or even maybe those watching this video, we used to be liberals too. Okay? Because back then, liberal was the closest thing that we knew of, that we were aware of, that, was aimed towards the kind of liberation that we now fight for. Okay? So, although a lot of us see this kind of animosity that we leftists share for liberals, but there's a reason for that, because there are some people who, like Zach was talking about, that armor kind of stays intact even with the kind of nuances and crises that we see throughout history, throughout, if nothing else, this past year. Those are the liberals that we're talking to, right? But that we're talking about. But the ones we're talking to are those who we know you're on the right path. You're just looking for it, and that's why we're here trying to suggest things like Marxism, because that is what's going to get you to and lead you to the path to liberation.
Yeah, and that's just one of the things, is that, being a Democrat, as an individual being a Democrat, you are there because of human decency. That's where you believe that there is human decency, is in the Democratic Party. However, once you see that the people that are leading don't really care about human decency, they're still bombing, they're still putting kids in jail, you know, all of these things. And so then you have to step into something else. And, you know, people make steps along the way that are different. And, you know, just the people that want liberation are the people that are going to continue going left. And, you know, Marxism is not only an ideology, it's not only theory, but it's also practice. You know, it is something that you put into practice. It is the fight. It is the struggle. And we're all in the struggle together, you know. Like we were saying, it's like we are not free until we are all free. That's why we're in the struggle together. And, you know, us united will never be defeated. And that's kind of the point of Marxism. That's the point of, you know, fighting for people. You know, it's not even just liberation, it's fighting for people, you know? And if, I mean, liberation is for the people, but people need to be fought for because people are worth it. You know, we're all worth it.
Yep. Yeah, so I'm going to out myself a little bit here, but I'm a Cancer sun, I'm a Scorpio moon, and a Pisces rising, right? I'm a whole ocean, okay? So, but I'm saying that only to talk about the fact that love is something that is so important to me, and a concept that for me, and I think for a lot of others, drives them and inspires them to follow this path of liberation, to fight for things like socialism as communism, is that sensation, that sentiment of love. So, you know, there are some who hear that quote by Mao Zedong about communism is not love, it is a hammer. You know, I believe and agree with Mao with a lot of things, but that's just one that I don't. I truly believe communism is love. I think it is the material manifestation of love in its purest form. And on that note about, you know, why we need to fight for people because they're worth it, there's that, but also because what makes it worth it is the shared love between ourselves, right? If you truly believe that you love yourself and you love humanity, this is really one of those things where I gotta say, like, the path to really truly show that is the communist Marxist path.
Yeah. And, you know, since you know, outed your signs, I want to go ahead and out mine and kind of explain, like, my, like, how 2020 shaped me.
Yeah.
Honestly, we didn't write anything for this, but, like, you just really triggered something in me because we went very opposite. However, I'm a Sagittarius sun, I'm a Gemini rising, and I'm a Pisces moon. So I'm very balanced in my opinion. And so one of the things is that I have never experienced anger before in my life, before 2020. I've always been a very, like, calm kind of, just like, you know, I wasn't like calm, like I was. You
swallowed it.
Yeah, like I was kind of somebody who just was very inward. Like I was either happy or numb.
Yeah.
That's kind of who I was as a person.
Yeah.
In 2020, I felt anger for the first time in my life, and that anger is what shaped me because, you know, there's something about knowing struggle, knowing theory. You know, I've been practicing and I've been protesting. I've been out there in the streets. I've been on your computer. I've been everywhere. And the thing is that anger taught me a lot on what it is to really be an organizer, because I'd never had that anger before. Like I knew, I was like, this is wrong, you know, this murder, that bomb, that, you know, coup, these are all wrong. And I knew that and I felt that, but that anger is something that made me really connect with people. And that was something that was missing in my life, was that anger, because I'm just not an angry person. And so to experience anger for the first time in 2020 was something that really shaped me in a way to understand other people's anger, because, you know, you can never know what people are going through unless you've experienced yourself. And, you know, anger was something that I was always like, now hold on, y'all, like, because anger had always scared me.
Yeah.
And the thing is that you cannot fear anger if you plan on being on the front lines.
Yeah.
And that is something that I learned, and something that I challenged myself with, and something that I've really grown in. And so, you know, You found love, I found anger.
Which, there's a lot to relate there too. So if anyone's a Star Wars nerd like I am, I'm not as much as I used to be, okay? I always kind of vibed with the Sith a little bit. I'm not gonna lie, I vibed with the Sith. The Republic, the Jedis were kind of lame a little bit. They're like too good, and there wasn't any clarification of their principle. With the Sith, though, it was a lot more principled in that they talked about anger, but that anger is nothing but chaos unless you channel that anger into power. And I think that's what a lot of us, right, do as Marxists and as communists is like, we may not be, may not have love as our impetus for liberation. Some of us literally just live through and with spite, through and with anger for the destruction of the systems that have put us where we are. Right? And that's why I think, there could be a way we could see Anakin as a based Marxist, honestly, in a way, In his way, he was part of the Empire, sure. But, his principle, his path was one that we could reform in a way to be used for good.
So, if you would like us to start a podcast where we talk about the Sith and whether or not they're Marxists, you should go ahead and leave a comment.
Leave a comment below, let's see.
But with that, we're going to go ahead and sign off. I want to thank the speakers. Thank you, Mustafa, for, cheering with me. As always, thank you, our audience. Please comment on how 2020 shaped your politics, and even if it goes into 2021. So much has happened, and it's only April. Only April. All stories are stories that we want to hear. So thank you so much, Houston. Stay in the streets.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Genesis with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. Hit the bell to subscribe to all our future content. If you'd like to get involved and join the fight against capitalism, visit pslweb.org/join. You can also find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and CashApp at HoustonTXPSL. Follow our mutual aid efforts on Instagram at Community Solidarity Project. We have some great podcasts, including the Socialist Program with Brian Becker, The Punch Out with Eugene Puryear, and It's Not You, It's Capitalism. Finally, find updates on liberationnews.org, breakthroughnews.org, and denverdefense.org. All these resources will be in the description down below. Thank you for joining us, and see you next time.